The Indo-China War of 1962, also known as the Sino-Indian War, was a border conflict between India and China that took place in the Himalayan region. The war lasted for about 1 month, from October 20 to November 21, 1962. The conflict resulted in a decisive Chinese victory, and it had significant political, military, and diplomatic consequences for both India and China. Background. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the territorial disputes between India and China in the Himalayan region. The border between India and China was not clearly demarcated, and both sides claimed several areas along the border. The border dispute escalated in the late 1950s when China started to construct a road through the Aksai Chin region, which India claimed as its own. India protested against the construction of the road, but China continued with the project, arguing that the road was necessary for their national security. In 1962, tensions between India and China increased when India started to build military posts along the border to assert its claim over the disputed territories. The conflict. The conflict began on October 20, 1962, when Chinese troops launched a surprise attack on Indian positions along the border. The Chinese troops used their superior firepower and military tactics to quickly capture several strategic locations along the border, including the strategic town of Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. The Indian Army, which was ill-prepared and poorly equipped, suffered heavy casualties in the initial stages of the conflict. The Indian Air Force was unable to provide adequate air support due to the difficult terrain, and the Indian troops were cut off from their supply lines, which made their situation even more precarious. Despite the odds, the Indian troops put up a valiant defense, but they were unable to withstand the superior Chinese forces. The Chinese army was well equipped with modern weapons, and their troops were well trained and disciplined. They used their superior firepower and mobility to outmaneuver and outflank the Indian troops, who were poorly equipped and had outdated weapons. The Indian government, led by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, was initially confident that the Indian army would be able to repel the Chinese attack. However, as the conflict progressed, it became evident that the Indian troops were outmatched by the Chinese forces. The Indian army suffered heavy casualties, and their morale was severely affected. On November 21, 1962, China declared a unilateral ceasefire and announced that it had achieved its objectives. The Chinese troops withdrew from the Indian territory that they had occupied, and the conflict came to an end. Consequences. The Indo-China War of 1962 had significant consequences for both India and China. The conflict had a profound impact on the political, military, and diplomatic relations between the two countries. For India, the defeat in the war was a significant blow to its national pride and prestige. The Indian government and the military were criticized for their lack of preparedness and for underestimating the Chinese threat. The conflict also exposed the weaknesses and shortcomings of the Indian armed forces, which were ill-equipped and poorly trained. The defeat in the war also had political consequences for India. The Indian government faced severe criticism from the opposition and the media for its handling of the conflict. Prime Minister Nehru's reputation was severely tarnished, and he was criticized for his foreign policy, which was seen as naive and idealistic. The war also had economic consequences for India. The conflict had a negative impact on the Indian economy, which was already struggling due to the food crisis and the devaluation of the Indian currency. The war further exacerbated the economic problems, and India had to seek foreign aid to stabilize its economy. For China, the victory in the war was a significant achievement. Thanks for watching. If you like more content, please subscribe to this channel.